Girl hears her father's death sentence. Then her German shepherd does the unthinkable. He didn't do it, Bruno. He's innocent. Lena sobbed, burying her face in his fur. I have to get him out of there. Later that night, as she went through the case files, her suspicions fell on her father's shady business partner, Mr. Braun. When she spoke his name, Bruno growled deep in his throat as if he knew that name and despised it. What did the dog know that humans didn't? To hear the whole unbelievable story of how a loyal dog did the unthinkable, like this video, subscribe our channel, and here watch the story until the end. The air in the large criminal courtroom of the Hamburg Regional Court was so thick you could have cut it. It tasted of old wood dust and stifled hope. Anja Weber, 17 years old, sat on the hard wooden bench, her fingers gripped so tightly into her mother's that her knuckles turned white. Every heartbeat pounded against her ribs, a desperate rhythm against the oppressive silence of the room. Before her, in the glass case of the dock, stood her father, Thomas Weber, a man who had taught her how to ride a bicycle and read the stars, whose laughter had always filled the entire house. Now he was a shadow of his former self, his face gaunt, his eyes empty, his shoulders hunched under the weight of months of pretrial detention. The presiding judge, a man with a face of granite, cleared his throat. The sound was like breaking glass. Anya held her breath. The waiting, the grueling uncertainty of the past few months, everything was leading up to this one moment. In the name of the people, the judge began, his voice a lifeless drone. The following verdict is issued. The defendant, Thomas Weber, is found guilty of aggravated murder. A sob escaped her mother's throat. Anya felt her own scream stifled in her chest. The sentence is set at life imprisonment, the judge continued. He paused for what felt like an eternity, letting his words hang over them like an executioner's axe. The court also determines the particular gravity of the guilt and orders subsequent preventive detention. Preventive detention. The word exploded in Anya's head. It didn't just mean life. It meant he would never, under any circumstances, get out again. It was a legal death. No! Anya screamed, the words finally bursting out of her, raw and full of pain. No, he's innocent, Daddy. Her father turned to her. For a fleeting moment she saw the old gleam in his eyes, a mixture of love and infinite sadness. Then he was led away by the law enforcement officers. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, and the sound sealed the end of her world. Outside on the cold stone steps of the courthouse, Anya collapsed. Her body trembled uncontrollably. A few meters away, tied to a tree, a German shepherd yelped. Rex, her dog, her father's dog. He felt her pain as if it were his own. Anya crawled to him and buried her face in his thick black fur. He's innocent, Rex, she whispered, her tears soaking his fur. You have the wrong man. Rex let out a deep sigh and licked away her tears. There was promise in his intelligent amber eyes. Anya gripped him tighter, a new iron resolve beginning to push away the shock. We'll get him out of there, she swore, her voice trembling. I don't know how, but we'll get him out of there. I swear it to you. A year ago, their world had been in order. They lived in a modest house in Hamburg's Elbe suburbs. Her father, Thomas Weber, was a respected logistics manager at the port, a man whose word counted. Her mother, Sabine, was a teacher. Their life was characterized by routine love and their shared passion for their German shepherd Rex. Thomas had gotten Rex as a puppy and trained him from the beginning. It was more than just a hobby, it was a calling. He was a member of a local guard dog Verein, a demanding dog sport that combined tracking, obedience, and protection work. Rex wasn't a police dog, but through intensive training, he possessed skills that went far beyond those of a normal family dog. His nose was a precision instrument, his loyalty unwavering. For Anya, Rex was her shadow, her protector, her best friend. Disaster struck without warning. Thomas's business partner, a man named Jörg Hansen, was found shot dead in his office in the harbor area. The police quickly investigated. The evidence was thin but overwhelming. There was a suspected financial motive, a disagreement over an investment. A blurry surveillance video showed a figure resembling Thomas near the crime scene. A shoe print vaguely matched his work boots. It was a chain of unfortunate coincidences and circumstantial evidence that the prosecution wove into an overwhelming web. Thomas protested his innocence. From the beginning, he had told the police about a third-person Klaus Richter, a shady businessman with whom Hansen had recently been involved, something Thomas wanted to know nothing about. Richter was known for his ruthless methods and his connections to the underworld. "He's setting me up," Thomas had repeatedly said. "Richter is the one you need to find." But the police found no evidence linking Richter to the crime. Their investigation focused exclusively on Thomas Weber. For Anya and her mother, a grueling time began between visits to lawyers' rumors and dwindling hope. Her lawyer, Ms. Lang, was competent and committed, but even she had to admit that the chain of circumstantial evidence was difficult to break. The triggering moment was the verdict itself. It wasn't just a confirmation of her worst fears, it was a wake-up call. The shock and grief of the past few months turned into a cold, clear rage in Anya's heart. The system had failed. The police had failed. The justice system had sentenced her father to death, to a life behind bars, for a crime he didn't commit. The night after the verdict, Anya sat in her room, surrounded by the case files that Mrs. Lang had given her. Rex lay at her feet, his head on her legs, his warm breath a small comfort in the cold emptiness. She read the witness statements, studied the crime scene photos, tried to find any detail the police had overlooked. She knew the police wouldn't search anymore. For her, the case was closed. If there was still a chance of finding the truth, it was up to her and Rex. She looked down into the faithful eyes of her dog. He was more than just a pet. He was the last living legacy of her father's passion. He was a tracking dog, a protector. He was her only hope. In that moment, she made a clear, dangerous decision. She would do the police's job herself. She would prove her father was innocent. That was her goal, her only purpose in life from now on. Anya's resolve was quickly put to the test. Her mother, paralyzed by grief and fear, begged her to let the matter rest. "It's over, Anya. We have to accept it. Richter is a dangerous man. Please don't get yourself into trouble." The lawyer, Ms. Lang, also advised caution. "Anya, I understand your anger, but vigilantism is not a solution. The system has decided. A retrial is practically impossible unless new, irrefutable evidence emerges." New evidence, that was the key word. But where should she look? Anya began meticulously sifting through the case files. She focused on everything related to Klaus Richter. Her father had mentioned that Richter often held shady meetings in an old, almost forgotten part of the industrial port, a labyrinth of rusted warehouses and abandoned railway tracks. The police had only superficially checked this area, as there was no direct connection to the crime scene. For Anya, it was the only clue. On a foggy Saturday morning, while her mother was staying with relatives, Anya packed a flashlight and a bottle of water, put on an inconspicuous dark jacket, and called Rex over. "Come on, boy," she whispered. "Let's go for a walk." The industrial port was even more desolate and intimidating than she had imagined. The smell of brackish water oil and decay hung in the air. The silence was eerie, broken only by the distant screeching of seagulls and the creaking of metal in the wind. She let Rex off the leash. Such Rex, such. She commanded him using her father's old commands. At first, the dog seemed confused. He sniffed here and there, but the area was vast, the scents countless. Anya felt her hope begin to fade. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe this was all a crazy idea. But then Rex's demeanor changed. He tensed his nose, working on the ground with intense concentration. He led them away from the main paths, deeper into the labyrinth of dilapidated buildings. He stopped in front of a particularly large dilapidated warehouse, its windows smashed and its gate hanging by a single hinge. He whined softly and scratched at the door. "What's in there, boy?" Anya asked. Her heart began to pound. She squeezed through the gap in the gate. The interior of the hall was dark and smelled musty. Empty crates and old junk piled up in the corners. There seemed to be nothing unusual here. She searched the place for an hour, but found nothing that even remotely resembled evidence. Disappointed and frustrated, she left the hall. As she turned to leave, she froze. At the end of the alley was a black Mercedes. Klaus Richter got out. He smiled at her, a smile without warmth, cold and threatening. "A bit far from home for a walk, isn't it, little weavers?" he said, his voice oily. "This isn't a good place for young girls. You could get lost here, or worse." Rex stood protectively in front of Anya, a deep growl escaping his throat. Richter's smile froze. He raised his hands defensively. "It's okay. Just friendly advice." He got back into his car and drove away slowly. The encounter made Anya's blood run cold. It hadn't been a chance encounter. He had been watching her. It was a warning. The complications were no longer purely legal. The danger had become real. The stakes had just increased dramatically. She now knew she was on the right path, but this path was far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The days following the encounter with Richter were filled with fear. Anya felt like she was being watched. Every shadow seemed a threat. Her initial determination gave way to paralyzing despair. She hadn't found anything. She had only put herself and her family in even greater danger. One afternoon, she sat on an old loading dock near the warehouse Rex had shown her. She was on the verge of giving up her mother's words, and Richter's cold eyes echoing in her head. She buried her face in her hands. Rex, who had been restless beside her the whole time, suddenly began to act like a maniac. He whined, ran in circles, and then began digging in a specific spot at the bottom of the ramp where there was a pile of old bricks and construction debris. Dirt and stones flew through the air. "Rex, stop! What's going on?" Anya shouted, but the dog ignored her. He dug with a manic energy Anya had never seen before. It was as if he were following an invisible command driven by an instinct she couldn't understand. Suddenly, he encountered something soft. He pulled on it with his teeth and hurled an object onto the floor at Anya's feet. It was a plastic bag, dirty and knotted. Anya stared at the bag. Her heart pounded. Trembling, she picked it up and untied the knot. Inside was a single work glove, stiff with dried dirt and something dark that looked like blood. It was just a glove. It could mean anything or nothing. But Rex's behavior? He nudged the bag with his nose and then looked at it intently, as if to say, "This is it. This is what we were looking for. This was the turning point." It wasn't a spectacular find, no weapon, no confession, just a dirty glove. But it was something tangible. Anya packed the bag and ran. She ran all the way to Ms. Lange's office. The lawyer was initially skeptical. "Anya, an old glove that doesn't prove anything." "Please," Anya begged, her eyes filling with tears. "Rex found him. He dug like crazy. He's never done anything like this before. Please have him examined. I'll pay for it somehow." Ms. Lang saw the desperation and unshakable conviction in Anya's face. She sighed. "Okay, I have a contact at a private lab. No promises, Anya. This is a shot in the dark." 2 days later, Anya's phone rang. It was Ms. Lang. Her voice sounded completely different, tense, excited. "Anya, you must come to my office immediately." In the office, Ms. Lang placed a preliminary lab report on the table. "The glove," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It has traces of gunpowder on it. And the blood, it's a blood-type match for the victim, Jörg Hansen." Anya stared at her, hardly daring to breathe. "But that's not all," Ms. Lange continued, pointing to a highlighted line. "The DNA traces inside of the glove. They come from an unknown male, but one thing is certain, they do not come from your father." At that moment, everything changed. Anya was no longer just the grieving daughter, desperately grasping at straws. She was the one who had found the crucial evidence. She had shifted from a reactive role to a proactive one. They had irrefutable proof that a third party had been at the crime scene. The point of no return had been reached. The fight for her father's freedom had only just begun. With the lab report in hand, Ms. Lang officially filed a motion for a retrial. It was a legal earthquake. The public prosecutor's office, which had considered the case closed, was forced to reopen the investigation. News of the new piece of evidence quickly spread through Hamburg's legal circles. Klaus Richter found out about it. His reaction was subtle but unmistakable to Anya. The black Mercedes appeared more frequently on her street, parked at the end for a few minutes, and then slowly drove away. Once she found a dead bird on her doormat, a macabre, unmistakable message. The intimidation became more direct, more personal. Anya barely slept anymore. Every bang, every noise in the night startled her. This was her dark night of the soul. Fear gnawed at her. She alone was responsible for having provoked this dangerous man. She considered dropping everything, going to the police, and asking for protection, withdrawing the application just to keep her mother and herself safe. The thought that something else could happen to someone else because of her was unbearable. But then she saw the photo of her father on her nightstand, his smile, the sadness in his eyes at the verdict. And she knew she couldn't give up. Not now. The police, now under pressure from the public and the judiciary, assigned a new lead investigator to the case, Chief Inspector Bauer, an older, experienced officer whose skeptical gaze initially intimidated Anya. He listened to her story, the story of Rex's discovery, with professional detachment. "A dog digging up evidence," said Bauer, rubbing his chin. "You don't hear that every day, Miss Weber." Despite his skepticism, Bauer was thorough. He ordered an official DNA analysis of the glove and compared the unknown profile with the national database. No match. The wearer of the glove had no criminal record, but the evidence was incontrovertible. The investigation now focused on Klaus Richter. He was placed under covert surveillance. The police tapped his phones and tracked his movements. However, they needed a direct connection between Richter and the glove or the crime scene. The glove alone did not prove that was the carrier. The decisive breakthrough came again from Anya. During a conversation with Inspector Bauer about her father's habits, she casually mentioned that her father had always complained about Richter's smuggling business. He suspected that Richter was using the abandoned warehouse in the industrial port as a transshipment point for illegal goods. Bauer's eyes narrowed. Smuggling? That's not in any file. Suddenly, everything made sense. The glove wasn't found at the crime scene itself, but near Richter's warehouse. The perpetrator must have fled there after the crime to get rid of the incriminating object. The police now had enough information to obtain a search warrant for the warehouse and Richter's business premises. The tension was palpable. Preparations for the final blow were underway. Anya knew that the answer she had so desperately sought was imminent. Either Richter would fall into their trap, or her last spark of hope would be extinguished for good. At dawn the following day, the police struck. Several police vehicles cordoned off the abandoned part of the industrial port. Inspector Bauer personally led the operation. They stormed the warehouse that Anya and Rex had discovered. The hall wasn't empty. In the back, hidden behind a false wall, was a small makeshift office, and inside sat Klaus Richter, busy destroying documents. When he saw the police, he froze for a moment, then grabbed a briefcase and tried to escape through a back exit. But the exit was blocked. He was trapped. Bauer and two officers confronted him in the middle of the huge, cold hall. "It's over," Judge Bauer said calmly. Richter laughed an ugly, shrill sound. "Over? You have nothing against me. Absolutely nothing. You'll never find the murder weapon." He was arrogant, self-assured, convinced he'd covered up all traces. Bauer took a step closer. He pulled a small sealed bag from his pocket. Inside lay the dirty work glove. "We don't need the gun," Bauer said quietly, but every word echoed in the silence of the hall. "We have your DNA from inside this glove. A dog found it, by the way. Ironic, isn't it?" When Richter saw the glove, his facade crumbled. The color drained from his face. He stammered, trying to find an excuse, but his body betrayed him. In that moment, everyone in the room knew he was the murderer. The central question that had destroyed Anya's life had been finally answered. Klaus Richter was arrested, his resistance broken. The fight was won. The legal wheels turned slowly, but they turned. The retrial was merely a formality. Klaus Richter, confronted with the overwhelming evidence, confessed, hoping for a lighter sentence. He had killed Jörg Hansen in a dispute over the division of smuggling profits, and then laid the trail in such a way that suspicion fell on his unwelcome partner, Thomas Weber. The day of Thomas Weber's release was a sunny autumn day. Anya and her mother waited outside the high gates of the remand prison. When the heavy door opened and her father stepped out, paler, thinner, but a free man, Anya ran toward him. They cried and laughed at the same time, a family that had gone through hell and found itself together again. A few steps behind them, Rex was waiting, held by Mrs. Lang. Thomas knelt down and took the dog in his arms. "You knew, didn't you, my boy?" he whispered, burying his face in Rex's fur. "You knew all along. You're the best partner anyone could ask for." The story of Anya and Rex became a local sensation. Newspapers called Rex the dog who sniffed out justice. He received an honorary award from the Hamburg police and a special medal on his collar. Weeks later, the Weber family sat in their living room. The fire crackled in the fireplace. Thomas talked about his time in prison, but without bitterness. Anya, no longer the desperate girl, but a young woman who had discovered her own strength, listened to him. Rex lay at her feet, his head on her lap, his body relaxed and content. Anya looked into her dog's amber eyes. He wasn't just a pet, he was a hero. He was proof that loyalty needs no words, and that sometimes the truth lies buried in the darkest places until a loyal friend comes along to dig it out. She had sworn to get her father out of there, and with the unwavering help of her German shepherd, she had done it.